Early March 1943, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. Captain Paul "Pappy" Gunn stares at the modified bomber before him. Inside that aircraft is something that should not exist. Something that violated every regulation in the United States Army Air Force's manual and that his commanding officer had not officially authorized. 8 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns protrude from where a bombardier's glass nose should have been. The B-25 Mitchell medium bomber, a plane designed for precision bombing from altitude, had been transformed into something entirely different. A ship killer. This was an illegal experiment that would either save the Pacific Theater or earn Gunn a court-martial. What no one knew was that this unauthorized modification, born from desperation and personal fury, was about to trigger one of the most devastating defeats the Japanese Navy would suffer in the entire war. The fate of the war in the Southwest Pacific was being decided not in Washington, but in a maintenance hangar by a maverick fighting his own private war. The journey to this illegal experiment began 2 years earlier, born not from military strategy, but from personal tragedy. On December 8, 1941, Paul Irvin Gunn, a 42-year-old former Navy chief petty officer and manager of Philippine Airlines, stood at Nichols Field watching Japanese bombers methodically destroy the American Air Forces. Within hours, he was commissioned as a captain in the Army Air Corps. In the chaotic weeks that followed, Gunn received orders to evacuate key personnel to Australia. He prepared to take his wife, Polly, and their 4 children to safety, but the Japanese advance was too swift. His family could not make it to the airfield in time. Forced to choose between his family and his duty, he flew to Australia because orders were orders. Weeks later, he received the devastating news. His family had been captured and taken to the Santo Tomas internment camp. The script states, something broke inside Gunn when he learned this news. He couldn't save his family directly, so he decided to end the war faster. This was vengeance disguised as innovation. Gunn's personal quest for vengeance was happening inside a much larger strategic disaster. In late July 1942, Major General George Kenney arrived in Brisbane to take command of the Allied Air Forces, and found a catastrophe. Morale was terrible, equipment was inadequate, and the Japanese controlled the air over New Guinea. The core of the problem was tactical. Allied bombing from medium and high altitude was proving catastrophically ineffective against Japanese ships. High-altitude bombing gave ships time to maneuver, and as a result, the mighty B-17 flying fortresses were hitting less than 1% of their targets. This failure had devastating consequences. Japanese convoys were resupplying their garrisons in New Guinea with impunity, meaning Allied ground forces were dying in the jungle while fresh Japanese troops poured ashore from ships that bombers could not sink. The Allies were losing the war in the Southwest Pacific, not for a lack of courage, but for a lack of a weapon that could actually hit a moving ship. But General Kenney was a World War I fighter ace, known for his unconventional thinking. He wasn't looking for textbook solutions. He was looking for a way to win. In August 1942, he learned that someone was modifying A-20 Havoc light bombers without authorization. This rogue engineer had removed the bombardier and installed 4 50-caliber machine guns in his place, all firing forward. Most officers would have court-martialed Gunn for modifying military aircraft without authorization, but Kenney recognized the genius in the madness. He saw a man who understood aircraft not from textbooks, but from 2 decades of hands-on experience. Instead of punishment, Kenney gave him a promotion. He immediately assigned Captain Paul Gunn to his personal staff as Special Projects Officer, and gave him an impossible mission: perfect the A-20 modification, and then apply the same radical concept to an even bigger prize, the B-25 Mitchell medium bomber. The Maverick had found his man. Gunn's illegal idea was about to become the Allies' secret weapon. Gunn's new target was the B-25 Mitchell, an aircraft already famous in the American consciousness. The bomber had gained fame in April 1942, when Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle led 16B 25BS on a daring raid against Tokyo. But despite that morale-boosting victory, the B-25's primary role as a medium-altitude bombing was proving ineffective against ships. Where others saw a failing weapon, Gunn looked at the B-25 and saw potential no one else recognized. He saw that the aircraft's nose section was large enough to mount multiple heavy machine guns. He knew its sturdy construction could absorb punishment, and its twin-engine design provided redundancy. Losing one engine would not doom the aircraft. Where the Army Air Forces saw a bomber, Pappy Gunn saw a ship killer hiding in plain sight. Gunn's vision required him to deconstruct the B-25 as a bomber and rebuild it as a flying gun platform. His first and most radical step was to remove the bombardier and his glass nose section. In its place, he installed a solid metal nose housing 450 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, all firing forward and operated by the pilot. But 4 guns were not enough. He then added 2 more 50 caliber guns in cheek blisters on either side of the forward fuselage. Finally, in a truly radical move, Gunn targeted the plane's defensive armament. The B-25 had a dorsal turret with twin 50 caliber guns. Gunn locked the turret in the forward firing position, adding 2 more guns to the pilot's control. The result was a monster. The modified B-25 now had 8 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns. For comparison, a single P-51 Mustang fighter carried 6. Pappy Gunn had given a medium bomber the forward firepower of more than one fighter aircraft. It was no longer a bomber, it was a strafer. But the 8 machine guns were not designed to sink the ship, they were designed to silence it. The killing blow came from a second, equally brilliant innovation in tactics known as skip bombing. First, the B-25 would approach the target ship at extremely low altitude, flying at maximum speed. At 1,000 yards, the pilot would open fire with all 8 guns. The stream of 50 caliber bullets would sweep the decks, killing or suppressing anti-aircraft gunners, and creating chaos. With the ship's defenses silenced, the pilot would release a 500-pound bomb with a 4 to 5 second delayed fuse. The bomb would hit the ocean and skip across the surface like a stone, slamming into the ship's hull at or below the waterline, where the armor was weakest. The delayed fuse allowed the bomb to penetrate the hull before detonating underwater, using the force of the water itself to cause catastrophic damage. But turning this concept into a functional weapon presented enormous engineering challenges. First, adding weight to the nose shifted the aircraft's center of gravity forward, making it nose-heavy and difficult to control. Gunn compensated by repositioning equipment and ballasting the tail section. Second, the enormous recoil from 8 guns firing simultaneously created structural stress, requiring Gunn to reinforce the nose section with additional bracing. Most critically, he had to solve the problem of gun harmonization. The 8 guns needed to converge their fire at a specific point, typically between 200 and 400 yards. If the guns were not properly aligned, bullets would spray everywhere except the target. Gunn developed a ground testing procedure, adjusting each gun mount until all 8 weapons converged precisely, personally test firing them until they met his exacting standards. This was greasy, hands-on engineering that turned a brilliant idea into a perfectly tuned killing machine. While Gunn was perfecting his killing machine, Allied intelligence was hunting for the perfect target. In late February 1943, they found it. Thanks to Ultra Intercepts, the top-secret operation that had cracked Japanese naval codes, Allied intelligence learned that a major Japanese convoy was assembling at the port of Rabaul. The intelligence was chillingly specific. The convoy consisted of 8 transport ships scheduled to carry approximately 6,900 troops, and an escort of 8 destroyers. Their mission was to reinforce Japanese forces fighting in New Guinea. This was Japan's maximum effort. If the convoy succeeded, the Allied advance could be stopped cold. General Kenney saw the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to test Gunn's new weapon against the most important target since Pearl Harbor. His orders to his commanders were explicit: find the convoy, attack without mercy, and sink every ship. This was not a raid. This was annihilation. At dawn on March 3, 1943, weather conditions were perfect for an air attack. For the Japanese convoy, now just 30 miles from its destination, the moment of truth had arrived. A massive strike force of approximately 90 Allied aircraft converged on their position, a combined force of B-17 Flying Fortresses, modified B-25 strafers, Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters, and P-38 Lightning fighters for escort. This would be the largest coordinated air operation in the Southwest Pacific to date. The attack began at approximately 10 in the morning with a perfectly orchestrated, multi-layered plan. The B-17 struck first from medium altitude, diverting attention and forcing the ships to maneuver into chaos. Then the low-level attackers arrived. Beaufighters came in first, strafing, suppressing anti-aircraft fire. And right behind them came Pappy Gunn's creations. Then the modified B-25 strafers arrived, and the slaughter began. The perfectly coordinated plan unfolded into a perfectly executed slaughter. One pilot selected the transport Kyakusei Maru as his target, and pushed his B-25 down to just 50 feet above the water. At 1,000 yards he opened fire. The combined fire of 8 50 caliber machine guns ripped into the transport, shredding the bridge and blowing apart anti-aircraft positions. Then he released his bombs. 2 500-pound general-purpose bombs, skipped once, and slammed into the hull just below the waterline. The underwater explosions ripped the bottom out of Kyakusei Maru, and the ship would sink within 15 minutes. This scene was repeated across the water as each B B-25 selected a target and executed the same devastating attack profile. The transport Tio Maru went down with nearly 1,000 troops still aboard. Even Admiral Kimura's flagship, the destroyer Shirayuki, was hit by strafing fire and bombs, sinking after secondary explosions blew the stern section off. Japanese Zero fighters tried desperately to protect the convoy, but they were helpless. The B-25s were flying at masthead height where fighters could not safely attack without hitting their own ships. The slaughter was total. When the Allied aircraft withdrew, the final scorecard of the battle was not just a victory, it was a complete annihilation. By nightfall on March 3rd, all 8 transports and 4 of the 8 destroyers had been sunk. Approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors were dead or drowning. Of the 6,900 troops originally sent to reinforce New Guinea, only about 1,200 would eventually reach their destination, many without weapons or equipment. In stark contrast, Allied losses were remarkably light. In total, 1 B-17 Flying Fortress was shot down, and 3 P-38 fighters were lost in combat. Just 13 aircrew were killed. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was a decisive turning point in the Pacific War. The defeat was so total that never again would Japan attempt a major convoy to New Guinea. The brutal, lopsided numbers were undeniable proof Pappy Gunn's illegal idea worked. The success at the Bismarck Sea was so undeniable that Pappy Gunn's illegal idea was about to become official policy. General Kenney ordered all available B-25s in theater converted to the Strafer configuration. The experiment was now the new standard. The news reached the B-25's manufacturer, North American Aviation, who promptly sent representatives to study Gunn's modifications. Soon after, Gunn was promoted to major and sent back to the United States to work with their engineers to design factory-produced Strafer versions. This collaboration resulted in the B-25G, which mounted a 75mm cannon, followed by the H&J models. Thousands of these factory-built Strafers, based on his initial unauthorized work in a muddy hangar, would be built and serve across the Pacific. The illegal idea had gone mainstream, and the ultimate ship killer was now rolling off the assembly line. While Gunn's innovation was changing the course of the war, his own personal war continued. His family remained imprisoned, and he continued to fly combat missions at age 45. In late 1944, during a Japanese bombing raid on Leyte, white phosphorus bombs exploded nearby, and fragments tore into his shoulder, causing massive damage and ending his combat flying career. But while Gunn was recovering in an Australian hospital, the war finally reached his family. On February 3, 1945, soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division liberated the Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila, freeing over 4,000 internees. Among them were Polly Gunn and her 4 children. They had survived 3 years and 14 days of internment. General MacArthur personally visited the camp and arranged for them to be flown to Australia. Weeks later, the man who had turned his personal fury into a weapon of war finally held his family again. The illegal experiment had not only helped win the war, it had fulfilled its creator's most desperate hope. Pappy Gunn's personal war was over, but the price of his innovation was steep. He was medically retired due to his injuries on June 30, 1948, as a full colonel. His incredible record of service and sacrifice was etched in his decorations, which included the Distinguished Flying Cross with 1 oakleaf cluster, the Silver Star, and an astonishing 9 Purple Hearts, representing 9 separate occasions on which he was wounded or injured in combat. After the war, he returned to the Philippines and re-established Philippine Airlines. But the man who had survived countless dogfights and bombing runs could not escape the inherent risks of aviation. On October 11, 1957, Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn died in a plane crash after his aircraft encountered a severe storm. He had survived the war he helped to win, only to be claimed by the skies he had mastered. In the end, the modified B-25 was not the single weapon that won World War II, but it was a weapon that achieved effects disproportionate to its numbers. Pappy Gunn's story is a powerful testament to the nature of innovation. He demonstrated that innovation could come from anywhere, even from modifications made by a grieving father in a maintenance hangar. He refused to accept that existing weapons were adequate and refused to accept regulations that prevented innovation. That refusal, born from personal desperation, created a weapon that shortened the war, saved Allied lives, and freed one family from 3 years of imprisonment, which for him was the point all along. It's the ultimate proof of how one person's illegal idea can change the world.